pleasure for me to be here today. I want to thank, first of all, the Ministry of Education and the Minister himself for being here, the European Commission, and all of you to be interested and passionate, I think, about the area of school leadership, which is actually an area that we see at the OECD as a forgotten policy area, actually. And so it is very, very good for us to hear that the Commission is taking on board this as a priority, because for the past 10 years there's been some progress, but school leaders actually are the second after teachers, the most important policy, the most important people to make change happen and to promote school improvement, to make sure that students learn. And many ministries of education do not really invest enough in school leaders and school leadership as a whole. So today I'm going to present to you the results of a study that we've done at the OECD with 22 OECD countries, and give you some of the recommendations that we came up with by looking at all the practices and lack of practices that are across the OECD. But I will also look at them looking towards the future. I mean, because we did this study in 2008, and the world moves very fast. We have many, many factors that are influencing in education. So I'm going to start by looking at the trends that we see are having a strong impact on education and therefore on school leadership. First of all, and I think already yesterday we reviewed the trends, what we see across OECD is that skills are changing, skills needs are changing, and this figure is actually quite interesting, is how workers believe they are skilled or underskilled, or are they overskilled? Do they have the skills to cope with more demanding jobs? And actually, more than 30% across OECD countries believe they're really underperforming, that they have much better skills that they are actually using at work. And at the same time, many believe, well, only 10% believe that they need further training. So they feel that they have the skill sets, and so there is a mismatch at the labor market, and at the same time a need for higher skills. We see that we need more skilled, higher educated. Across the OECD, we need people with at least up to upper secondary education. And what we see is actually that across countries, there has been quite a large increase of our educated populations. And this is a very basic figure that we have, where you see the changes in upper secondary for the older cohorts vis-a-vis the younger cohorts. And here, we always point to the case of Korea. All the way to the left, you see Korea. Only 30 years ago, 40% of the population had up to upper secondary education, and now it's up to almost 100% of the population. Korea invested in education, prioritized education, and now every Korean almost has an upper secondary education. On the other side, you see the OECD average, which is around a little bit 60 to 70%. So we see that completion has improved, but we still need a long, far way to go. At the same time, we see that our populations are changing. We see migration. We know there's a lot of migration, and this is a huge challenge for our education systems. We see more diverse families, less marriages, smaller families, monoparental families. We see that there's many more working women than before, and so what happens with their children? Where do they go, and what is the role of education when both parents are out of the house and there is maybe a different role for education or not? It's a question. We also see that we're growing older and that there's less young people to support us. So we need them to work very hard so that they can support us when we're old. And we actually see, and this is a very worrying trend, that we're growing fatter. And this you can see with a figure at the OECD that also has to do with education, because if we start being more unhealthy, you know, this is going to be a huge cost for our health systems and for our societies as a whole. So just one, we see overall out of this means that we need to cater, our education systems need to cater to a more diverse population, so to meet equity and quality at the same time. So we need to educate everybody with high skills, and everybody, this means all. We cannot afford to have quality without equity. And this is one of the messages that we at the OECD have been promoting in the last years, that equity is as important as quality, and that we cannot afford to have some people uneducated because they're actually very costly to society. We know that when people are not educated, they have worse health, they eat worse, they cost more on our welfare systems, they go to jail more, and they produce less actually, so they pay less taxes. So economically, our education systems cannot afford to have people who are not educated overall. And this is a message, it's not a social message actually. It's not, oh, we have to help the disadvantaged. It's an economic imperative. And here, Pasi showed this yesterday in a different way. This is a figure that shows across countries which are the systems that combine equity with quality. And for us, and for me, these are our champions. Here is Finland, Korea, but also Canada and Norway, Denmark, and I do not see Australia, but Australia is also there. There's a number of countries that manage to have high quality with high equity. And that's the green corner up there. And on the left are countries where it does matter very much who you are and who your family is actually to your education results. So the impact of what is called the socioeconomic background on your education is very high. So both the red and the orange up top are systems where it does make a big difference who you are, and education systems do not manage to really reduce that impact at all. And below are countries where they have low quality but high equity. So our aim is to move towards the green quadrant. And we know that it can be done because many countries have done it and are doing it. Now, the last trend that I'm viewing here is the growth of IT. We all use IT. We know it's everywhere. It's pervasive. This is the number of web servers and how it's grown from 2000 to 2010. And this has a huge impact on our education system because it demands for our systems to change how we learn, and also regarding the use of data, because we are using much more IT to measure. And so what does this mean? Well, we have more technology in the classrooms and the schools, and that means that our teachers and our principals have to get up to par to use this in their everyday life much more than they've been used to. The second one is the use of data, and that is something we discussed yesterday, and that Pasi was promoting data. Too much data can actually, there is a risk. And we believe that there is a risk of being too data-driven. But at the same time, data is evidence. So in the 21st century, we cannot afford to not know what is happening in our schools, and we need to use that data to support our schools to improve. So we believe that there needs to be a balance between the use of data for accountability and the use of data for improvement. Indeed, parents and society want to know how our schools are doing, but it's especially important to use this data to reflect on how we can make our students be better, learn better, and how we can help our teachers get there and our schools get there. And always keeping in mind not to teach to the test, which is the largest risk that we do see happening across some countries. And the third trend is e-learning. E-learning is coming slowly, and it's going to hit us. And one day there could be no schools because kids 14 years old, as the video that Pasi showed yesterday, they like learning, but they don't like school. So they will go somewhere else to get their learning. And you know, what would ministries do where they forgot and all of a sudden we don't have students because they're going somewhere else and they don't care that they have an official certificate or not. So, I mean, it's quite important for our schools to integrate e-learning to reflect on how to better integrate our IT tools into schools and make learning attractive for students, because they will go somewhere else to find their learning eventually if there are better platforms, and there are growing platforms like Coursera at the university level, but different models. So still, we have a number of challenges. All across OECD countries, this is the proportion of students that do not reach a sufficient level to function in today's societies, and that's at least 18%. 2 out of 10. That's quite high, and we cannot afford this at all. And at the same time, here's the impact of socioeconomic background and other variables on performance. And you see the OECD average, and what this shows is the relative risk of being an underperformer if you're either of a low socioeconomic background status, or your parents have a low level of education, or you have an immigrant status, or boys actually, who are showing much lower performance than girls across many countries, to the extent that some countries are quite worried and doing boy-driven, trying to find ways to make sure that boys are more attracted to education and are doing better. So still, we have many challenges. We see, overall, we see that skills transform lives and they transform economies. And education is at the heart of how to improve our economic systems, our social systems, and our children and ourselves. And this means that our education systems have to be equitable and of high quality. That has to be the key priority of our public education systems. And policymakers need to have information, and they need to have the evidence base to promote reforms that will look at improvement. And this is still quite lacking across OECD countries. Education, there's not that much evidence of what really works, because a reform takes around 8 years to have an impact, and you know, our ministers change every 4 years often, and reforms are introduced, then there is a change, then there's a new reform, and we actually hardly ever evaluate what is happening across countries. So we believe that we need to do much more evidence-based analysis of what really works to improve school outcomes. Now, we also see that countries share many of the same challenges, such as equity, quality, low-performing dropout, but that countries respond very differently depending on their context. Some countries have very decentralized systems where it's actually the local school boards that develop policy. Others have a very national system. Others, so there is quite a degree of difference across countries in how they respond and what are their priorities. And we believe it's very important to keep that richness and not to go towards standardization. There's not one solution for all the problems. There are many solutions that need to be tailored to the context. And what we have come up with, and there is a set of key policy levers that we believe make a difference for improving the results of our schools. One is, as I said, equity and quality. Is the system conducive to equity for its students? The second one is how our systems are preparing students for the future. How is upper secondary, how is VET, and how is tertiary being directed to help our students? The third is evaluation and assessment. How are we best using data, best measuring to improve systems outcome? To improve, not only to measure. Measure is an intermediate step. And the last one, which is the one that I'm going to concentrate on today, is school improvement. And that is, how can our schools best deliver education to improve the results of our schools? And here, I'm going to start looking at school leadership. The evidence, much of the evidence of the literature, the research has shown that after teachers, school leaders have the largest impact on school improvement. Now this is something very difficult to measure because it's indirect. Because what school leaders do is they set the right environment for teachers to teach well and for students to learn well. So how do you measure that? It's really intangible. But you know when there's a bad leader. And you know when there's a good leader, but you cannot, it's very difficult to measure. But what they do is they set the right discipline, the right environment at the school level. And that's what the literature has shown across OECD countries. Now, still, what we see is that many governments have not targeted this key area as much as they should. And it's actually economically quite a smart thing to do because there's many teachers across your education systems, but maybe, for 200 teachers, there's one principal. So if you invest in one principal, it's going to be much cheaper for you than investing in 200 teachers, and that principal will influence the 200 teachers that work in their schools. And so it is a very important policy lever for ministries to have as partners of implementation of reforms, of improvement, because they will work with the teachers in their schools to make sure that their students are learning. And so it cannot be forgotten. It needs to be targeted as a priority. Now, school leaders, the role of school leaders has changed immensely. And I want to stop here and ask, how many school leaders are there here? Are there any from Lithuania or from other countries? Okay, a few. Well, maybe if you want to intervene later and share your experience with us to see whether you feel related to what we're saying. We see that the role of school leader has changed immensely. There's more and more school autonomy, and there's more decentralization. It's at the local level. So really, principals have to run a small business almost. They have to manage human and financial resources. They have to adapt the teaching program, and at the same time, as we were saying, there's more data. And because education has become such a priority, there's a lot more accountability. Everybody wants to know and to measure what schools are doing, what their teachers are doing. They want to publish the test results. And so principals have to handle this. They have to respond to this. They have to be able to measure. They have to understand assessment. And they have to use that data productively to make sure that they show the value added of their schools. And at the same time, there's more personalized learning. There's new approaches to teaching, to learning, and this means, and there's a need for teachers to work together. And so principals have to drive collaborative learning environments. So all of this is pushing principals to be super women and supermen, superheroes. How can you do that in 40-hour work weeks? 40-hour work weeks for a salary that is often maybe just 20% more than being a teacher. Who wants to be a principal, actually? If you're being asked to do everything, respond, be responsible for all the kids in the school, for the relationship with the parents, to drive teaching and learning, and across countries, you only get a very small plus in your salary to be a principal. But you get a huge workload, and we know, for example, in England that the hours that they put in is 60 hours per week. So the job, is not negligible, it's very important, it's a very professionalized job, and needs to be recognized as such. And here we see, principals have to work with teachers. And so I just wanted to show you what how students view their teachers, because we have to keep in mind the students. How do they feel? What do they think about their learning? And this is a questionnaire out of PISA asking the students how do they feel about their teachers. And so you see the OECD average, So about 50% across OECD, they say that teachers ask students to explain the meaning of a text. 50% say that the teachers encourage students to express their opinions about a text. Actually, the teacher, only about 30% say that the teachers help students relate the stories to their lives. So here you see, 50% is not very high. What about the other 50% that don't relate so much to their teachers? And this one is how teachers feel. How do they feel? Do they feel they're making a difference with their students? So the dark bar is actually teachers who strongly agree that they're making a difference in their students. And that's only around 20% average of TALIS. This is not OECD countries. But the rest teacher agree, but agree strongly is not that high. And do they feel they're successful with their students in the class? No. Only Norway is above really the average. And actually students don't feel at all that in Norway that the teachers are making a difference. But it's quite low. Do they feel they're making progress with their students? So they agree, but strongly agree, not so much. So this is the body of people that principals have to work with. They have to encourage their teachers. They have to be professional. Not only that they feel that they're making a difference, they have to work with their teachers to make a difference. And that's what is important. And principals feel, actually, that they have, and the red dot is that they feel at least 20% feel that their teachers have a lack of pedagogical preparation to work with their students. So again, we see all the challenges, the difficult challenges for policy. How do you really make sure that you have the best teachers to get the best results out of your education system, which is an economic imperative for all of us? Again, here, this is a figure on the autonomy of principals with a budget, but also with determining and establishing teacher salaries and firing teachers and selecting teachers. So they have, the OECDs in blue, about 50% have responsibility for firing teachers and selecting teachers for hire. So again, it's quite an important responsibility. And here are the practices of principals. And I want to point to you to the one in the middle, which says, I observe instruction in the classroom. Are our principals doing pedagogical leadership? Are they focusing really on what matters? And here, how many principals step into the classroom to see what is happening? Less than half. And actually, I'm only showing here the UK, which is one of the top that has invested most in school leadership. And Lithuania is quite high as well, but some countries really it's about 30%, 20%, who really walk around, step into a classroom, see what is happening. And that is the environment. The environment often is that teachers, they go into the classroom, they close the door, nobody knows what happens in there, and then they go out and you have another classroom, so a group of teachers working independently with their own students, and the principal doing the paperwork for the school and responding to accountability, to measures, and to broken windows, and to parent relations, but not having enough time to really focus on instruction in the classroom. Now, this is our policy framework for what we believe are important policies to improve school leadership. The first is to redefine the roles, because often, actually, there's no place where it's been spelled out what principals need to be doing. So you need to redefine the roles. And those need to be focused on school improvement, not on administration, but on school improvement. The second, administration is less important. It's important, but it doesn't need to eat up the role of school improvement. And that is supporting teachers. All the evidence points to the fact that when principals work with teachers, make sure that teachers work together in the classroom, give space for them, develop them, that's when there is school improvement. The second one is to develop knowledge and skills, and that means that principals need to be prepared to be principals. And, you know, would you ask a doctor to direct a hospital? Why would a teacher be able to run a school? And that's often the only requirement across countries. They just say, okay, you have to be a teacher for 5 years, and then you can apply to become a principal. So why would that person be prepared to run a school? Because they run a classroom? That is a different set of skills that they're required to have. They just need to be good pedagogical, they need to manage a classroom, but that doesn't mean they're going to know how to run staff, to convince, to develop other staff, to measure, to use assessment. So it is very important that principals are trained to be principals. And there are different models. You can either do it at the beginning before they're principals. In some countries they have induction. They also have continuous professional development. The third is to make sure that being a principal is an attractive profession. And we keep seeing across countries many instances when people they open up posts and they're vacant. Because the workload is huge, as I said, the working conditions are not great, the effort is very large, there's no incentive, and the career often, you either go back to being a teacher afterwards, so there's no career progression planned across countries. And the fourth is to have support for the schools as a whole, to make sure that schools have context support, that they have good resources, that they have time for planning. And we see many countries that have raised their performance where they've done whole school or whole school improvement programs that are targeting principals and teachers. So they put a package of school improvement that seem to be having a positive impact. So I want to look at the redefinition of the roles. The first, as I said, is teachers. Teachers. Principals have to work with teachers not only to plan the schedule of the year, but they have to know how the students in their classrooms are doing, make sure that all teachers are aware across the board of what their students are getting when they're failing. And I think Stefan Huber yesterday spoke about when we went to England, and what we've seen in a number of countries is these high school performers. The principals, they bring their teams, they have data, and they make sure that they know what's happening for one student across different classrooms and for all students within that classroom. And they put together teachers to discuss individual students, and they work to prevent failure. They work to, when they know a student is slightly underperforming, they intervene. And so that is what works. They have to make sure that they're having interventions before it's too late and kids drop out. So they work to support teachers, to monitor teachers. More and more they have to evaluate teachers, so they have to know a lot more about assessment. And they have to develop training programs that are adapted at the school level. They have to have a vision, and that means setting goals for their schools, to do assessment, which is a big part, and I think our rapporteur is quite an expert in assessment and has worked with us on this topic. And that means that they have to assess teachers, they have to assess the schools, and they have to self-assess as well. So they have to do a lot, and they have to respond to accountability. They have to manage strategic, financial, and HR management, and more they have to do system leadership, because we believe that all schools have to improve, not only one, and that means that our principals have to work together to share best practice, to collaborate with other schools and with the communities that surround them. This is an example in Australia of the most recent approved standards. This is how some countries are going about defining the roles of school leaders. I think it's Australia, Ontario, New Zealand, and the Netherlands as well. A number of countries have defined in a standard what do principals need to be doing. And that is something that can help guide the profession, can help guide recruitment and evaluation of principals. Now, in terms of developing principals, we believe there needs to be initial training. Now, it's very difficult because it's expensive. And so do you train anybody in teacher education institutions, or do you pre-select and then train them for a few years? This is what Austria does, for example. They pre-select and then they have a master's, a part-time master's, and then they confirm the selection if the principals have passed the course. Then it's very important to have induction. And that means to make sure that new principals work together with other principals to share frustrations, novelties, and developing purposefully induction programs is very important, and to continue in-service training. And one of the issues that is very important in this training actually is something that Richard Elmore, an academic from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, said, that the impact of training is the inverse of the square root of the distance of the training from the classroom, which means that the farther away the training is from what actually principals are doing, the less it's going to make any difference. So we have to make sure that the training is really related to their day-to-day work, or it will not have any influence. Now, in terms of attracting and retaining school leadership, first of all, it's important, hugely important, and very forgotten to professionalize recruitment. In many countries, it's the school boards that select the principals. And school boards are made up of volunteer parents who offer their time. Why would they know how to select a good principal? You know, and what are the criteria? Sometimes it can be a political appointee. In Mexico, for example, where I've been working, it was actually because they were part of the teacher union. So some of the criteria for selecting principals, if you select somebody based on a different criteria of what you want them to deliver, you're not going to get the right people to drive school improvement. So you have to professionalize recruitment and make sure that you have the right people coming in. Then, remuneration. Again, we believe it's very important to pay appropriately to signal that this is an important profession. It's not just an extra plus from being a teacher, it's a profession. And so 10% more than being a teacher would not encourage many people to really go and become, whether, you know, it's not for the money, but for the signaling effect that the salary says about how you value that profession. We believe it's important to appraise, to evaluate, to support improvement of the principals themselves, and in the end to have good career progression so that principals, they burn out. After 10, 20 years doing the same thing, principals, they may not doing it as passionate as well as they did it before. So there have to be options for them to go somewhere else, to allow for good energy and good professionals to arrive as well. And these are some examples of different countries who have different professional recruitment processes that are positive. We see Singapore. They're providing elements to evaluate candidates well. They have competency profiles, and they provide guidelines for training for those on recruitment panels. You cannot leave that decision alone to fate. And then this is the remuneration, the differences across countries between the teacher salary and the principal salary. So we do see that some countries the difference is quite large. In Sweden, for example, it can be up to 50, and these are the extremes. But in some countries it's up to 20, 30%, so it's something to reflect on. And in terms of school leader appraisal, this is something that is happening across many OECD countries. There's only 6 out of 29 countries that were evaluated that do not have any appraisal. And often it's used for summative purposes and formative purposes. Only 3 out of 17 countries use the information on evaluating teachers to help them develop better. And that's where we believe it's important to really focus on. So again, this is the summary of the 4 areas that we believe are very important to keep in mind and to follow, to develop. And in terms of reform, what we have been seeing across countries is that reforms are well figured out at the ministry level, but they don't happen at the ground. Why? Because you need to establish clear objectives, and often ministries are having 10, 20 objectives that are not helping the system. They're not guiding the system well as to where they need to prioritize their resources and their time and the investment of their principals, of their local school boards. So we believe that they have to establish clear objectives, align resources to make sure that the local governments are aligned, that they're doing the same thing. Otherwise, no reform will have any impact. Ensure that you involve the stakeholders in the process, that you discuss with teacher unions. If people don't accept the reforms, it will not happen. At the classroom level, nothing will reach the classroom level unless you convince the people who have to implement these reforms to really take them on board. And to prioritize the hiring of the best teachers and the best school leaders if you want to make sure that you have better education results. And to make sure that the center should be the work of schools and students. And this is why also yesterday we had a video of the students' view. And we should, there's somebody here today representing students. We need to hear students. We need to know what they want, or we're missing the point. And we need to make sure that the schools are the center of our work. And so this is the report that if you're interested in, that we did at OECD. And we actually have a toolkit that you can take these recommendations and reflect in your own context and see how you can apply these recommendations to your own system. That I welcome you to come to the website and download. It's for free. And now we have started a new, in case you would like to look at practices across the world, we started an Education Policy Outlook series where we're looking at every country's policies, including school leadership, including teacher policy. So if you want to learn and use examples of different countries, please come to our website, which is there, and download these profiles so that they can inspire as well your practice. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions.